class. Today I'm going to give a persuasive speech that you might not know about, like the topic, or some of you might have heard about it in the news. 1960, the beginning of the current Vietnam War, with Presidents JFK, Lyndon Johnson, and President Nixon sending in millions of troops against the Soviets. Here are some pictures which depict the Vietnam War. 15 years later, with nearly 60,000 American citizens dead and $648 million spent, according to CNN's Stephanie Watner, America finally pulled out, realizing too late that the military and financial cost of the war was too great. 60,000 American citizens dead. People just a few years older than you, and people as old as the grandpa you visit each summer. Some people that you've never seen before in your entire life. And some people you've been living with your entire life and suddenly have to live without. Then, 2001, the beginning of the current Afghanistan war, with Presidents Bush and Obama sending in millions of troops to fight the war against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. You can see that these pictures are very closely related to the ones before in the Vietnam War, because today we have a choice to take a different course of action, unlike the one taken in the Vietnam War. In the Vietnam War, we stayed there for 15 years, not gaining any success, and then we pulled out in utter failure. We don't want this to happen in the Afghanistan War. You can see this is a cartoon showing a soldier, and the sign says, "Welcome to Afghanistan," and when he pulls it off it says, "Welcome to Vietnam." This shows how closely related these two wars are. At this point of the war, President Obama has produced a plan in increasing the amount of troops for 30,000 additional troops, with a locked-in withdrawal date for 2013, says Frederick Starr of the DC Examiner. Recently, this troop increase was ordered in the United States' 9th year at war in Afghanistan. We invaded with the aim of destroying Al-Qaeda and the Taliban regime, one is the Afghanistan government currently in place, which is one that is run by, you can say, maniacs, and Al-Qaeda is the Islamic extremist group. Think about it. Is it right to send in another surge of troops when for the last 8 years nothing has changed there? Can we even pull off a victory when the government is barely legitimate there and barely hanging on in the face of an increasingly powerful Taliban insurgency? I have done loads and loads of research on this topic because it's so emotionally jarring, so current in today's news, and I've debated it firsthand in tournaments. Today, I will convince you that because the cost of lives is too great, the mission itself is impossible, and it could provoke a nuclear war, that President Obama's plan for increasing troops is without a doubt not in the United States' best interest. First of all, valuable lives will be jeopardized by this increase in troops. In the beginning of the war, the United States already suffered 1,000 casualties and 4,600 injuries. This level of damage has not been seen against our troops since the Vietnam War, which is a war that we are similarly following in PAT. Also, the height of violence has increased 60% from 2008 to 2009, says Mike Mullen, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs. And with this increase of troops, casualty rates are expected to rise in 2010. Also, sending in random numbers of troops, like 30,000, at random times, like now, aren't going to accomplish anything, especially when the violence has gotten worse there. Also, Robert Pape, a professor of political science at the University of Chicago, estimates that to control Afghanistan, you need 1 combat soldier for every 40 people in Afghanistan. As Afghanistan has a population of about 28 million, we'll need 500,000 Western troops for success. 500,000 troops. That's such a big number, because the U.S. Department of Defense estimates that we have 600,000 active military soldiers. 600,000 is around 500,000, and if we just start sending in all the U.S.'s active military soldiers into Afghanistan just to fight this war, that's totally unfeasible and totally impossible to do. Especially since we're going against a country that's a little smaller than the state of Texas. Also, you need the essential numbers, like the 500,000, or it will be a complete squander of American lives and effort. And this is only one factor hindering the success rate of the Afghanistan war. Also, the success rate hasn't increased in 8 years. For the past 8 years, we've done nothing to help change the situation in Afghanistan. For 8 years. Think about it. 8 years is enough time for a baby to grow into a second grader, but 8 years can't improve the situation in Afghanistan? That's such a long time frame, but yet nothing has happened in there. Also, we shouldn't just continue to heedlessly waste our resources and effort against a cause that is so hopeless and has no point when for 8 years nothing has happened. And we should focus in on the U.S.'s problems right now. We should protect ourselves first, and then worry about other nations and provide help for them. Also, how do we know it's a lasting endeavor if we continue to have a war in Afghanistan? We don't. And sadly, it won't. Because a major part to play in rebuilding a nation is winning the hearts and minds of the people. The term hearts and minds, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, is a method in military campaign, like saw in Vietnam and Afghanistan now, to win the popular support of the oppressed people of the nation. Right now, we can't win the hearts and minds of the native population when the bombs, when we continually bomb villages, food warehouses, hospitals, and their shelters. Sure, we have NATO soldiers going in and helping the Afghan people and trying to understand their culture, except that barely persuades them when we go in and try and be friends with them, and then a bunch of bombs come down showering on their houses. This is such a contradiction from our words and our actions. Also, Martin Luther King Jr., a civil rights leader, in his book Stride Toward Freedom, writes, "Violence only brings momentary results, but in spite of temporary victories, violence never brings permanent peace. It solves no social problem. It only creates new and more complicated ones." This totally can happen for Afghanistan, because when we go in there and use violence to try and rebuild a nation, what Martin Luther King Jr. just said will be the result of the war. Sure, maybe for a year or two they'll have some peaceful time with a rebuilt nation, but then right after that they'll go back to hostility because that's what they've been so used to for so many years. And also, what will happen after the war in the Middle East? We'll just fight a long war in Afghanistan for their short-lived peace. U.S. involvement in this war will not help rebuild Afghanistan. It will only create a temporary stabilized country that will go back to hostility in a couple of years. My third point is that by invading Afghanistan, a nuclear threat will arise in the Middle East. And according to Encyclopedia Britannica, again, a nuclear war is a military conflict where nuclear weapons, like an atomic bomb, are used to destroy a certain country or area in the earth. And this type of warfare is much more destructive than conventional warfare, where it's just guns and hand-to-hand combat, because there's radiation